Welcome, I'm Nick Gibson and I'm joined by Nathan Patton, Product Marketing Manager at Trimble, to explore the various technologies being used in the industrial metaverse. Nathan, welcome.
Thanks for having me, Nick.
So what are the metaverse technologies and solutions currently being used in industry?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of existing technology that's actually already being used in the industry across this idea of the metaverse. I think a lot of people immediately start to think about augmented reality, mixed reality, virtual reality. But in reality, we at Trimble and in the construction industry have really been building this idea of the metaverse for a long time now through technologies like laser scanning, LIDAR, mobile mapping, photos, even really that build up this concept of what we call the digital twin, right? I really see the metaverse as another extension or embodiment of that digital twin. So all of those different technologies really that's capturing what the real world is, and in some way displaying what that is in a digital format, to me, make up that metaverse today.
So construction in this country, at least, in talking to people, it seems that construction is some way behind in terms of using a lot of these embedded technologies. People still using kind of blueprints and paper-based plans and scratching their heads, etc. Is the industry, am I right in thinking the industry is lagging behind in the adoption of these technologies?
Yeah, I think there's definitely some hesitancy to new technology in the construction industry. When you look at it, the process of construction really hasn't changed since Roman times, right? There's an architect or a planner who designs something, and then there are builders who go and build it, and there's all these confusions and miscommunications and changes that happen throughout that whole process, and that's largely stayed the same for centuries. So I definitely think the industry as a whole has some hesitancy towards it, but I do think there's obviously promising signs of finding technologies that really provide value and provide return on investment, and that's where you start to see the adoption. So as soon as you can start to provide real tangible value, the industry is ready to pick it up, because if they don't, their competitors will, and that's how you have to kind of stay afloat in the industry, right?
So is it a matter of then using digital twins and the like to design the building before you build it, or is it being basically used to replicate a building in order to better manage the processes involved in it?
Yeah, I think if we look at today's picture of that digital environment, it's very much on the pre-construction side. It's very digital in the design phase, trying to adopt 3D technologies for designing and building and coordinating what's going to then happen on the job site. But once we get into the field, I feel that's where the train goes off the rails, as it were. That's where the digital communication from field to office kind of stops, and you start to get two realities here. You get the digital reality, or the building information model, right? You get this digital reality in the office that is the design intent. And then you get the physical reality, what's actually happening on the job site, the real site conditions, the real as-built conditions, and you get this reality information model. So now you have these two kind of opposing systems that clash with one another. And I think that as we go forward here, this industrial metaverse really needs to be a place where we put those two models into one, and we're able to have a look into the reality of the job site as well as the digital intent from the office. So to kind of rephrase your original question, I think it's really all about merging those two realities together, not having one for pre-design and then having something for the reality afterwards, but rather having everything kind of working together, right? I think the ideal scenario is where we have pre-design intent that influences the construction. We have real data coming from the job site in any kind of data format, whether that's laser scanning or pictures or single point data from a surveyor, and all of that then feeds back into that digital model, and we're kind of working together, and that influences the project schedule, budgets, materials, things like that. So a much more kind of give and take environment than we have today.
So there's an awful lot of data, an awful lot of information, it appears, in these scenarios, which is coming from all kinds of different sources, all kinds of different platforms, solutions, and formats, etc. Is it a connectivity nightmare? And the sort of thing that you do, is it like an off-the-shelf solution that you just plug in somewhere to a scenario and everything works, or is it still a matter of quite a bit of integration to get everything talking to each other?
Yeah, I mean, I feel that there's a couple things to unpack there, and absolutely, number one, I think the biggest problem with this, concept of the metaverse is going to be data. Like you said, there's just so much data, and the amount of data that we collect is only going to continue to increase as sensors become cheaper and better, and all sorts of things. I mean, there's a LIDAR scanner on your iPhone now, right? So there's more data sources everywhere. So one of the biggest problems that we need to solve is how do we make data flow from the field to the office and from the office to the field a lot better, not only in connectivity but in volume. How do we store that data? How do we organize it? How do we present the right data to the right person at the right time? And so that's a big challenge. And for us, what we're doing here at Trimble is trying to build that platform on which we can, it's never going to be an off the shelf type of thing when we're talking about this immense amount of data. But I think the way that we look at it is, you can build this central platform that allows you to put on top of it whatever vertical workflows you need to have. So if you have specific software integrations that you want, that's fine. But really the idea is, how do we make the data flow from field to office, office to field? How do we get people communicating and collaborating a lot better? So I think the biggest problems that we have to solve are definitely that data pipeline, as well as that communication and collaboration layer. How do we make everybody work a bit better together while transferring this immense amount of data every single day?
So with so much involved, there's an awful lot of standards and regulations that one has to comply with and to navigate. So what are the kind of standards and the regulatory criteria that you have to work within? And you're talking about so much connectivity and collaborative working, etc. Are there data privacy issues involved?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll be the first one to admit that I'm not the expert on the regulatory side of things by any stretch, but having worked in construction for many years before I joined the tech industry, and kind of flipped my role here. I've seen the adoption of ISO standards and different technology standards and different data requirements, even for things like total stations and for leveling and for designing and all sorts of things, right? It takes a long time to get there. But I think that's something that the construction industry will really require going forward. There's not a ton of regulation and standardization around 3D data right now. In fact, it's not a requirement for most jobs. Certain works across the world will definitely have that. I think, in Europe, obviously, it's a little bit more ahead than where I am here in North America. But that's a great example, right? Is that things are changing in different places at different speeds. So right now, it's really driven by the owner or the client, really, of a project as to what they care about, what they want. And so until we have some more standardization on what is required for a project, what digital data is necessary, is a digital twin a required end product, which absolutely it should be, right? Until we can get to that point where it's regulated and standardized and really assumed that it's going to happen, as opposed to that's a nice to have. I think there will obviously be challenges of getting away from paper plans and into the fully digital world. But on the other side of things, we talked about data security and data privacy. The more data we have flowing, obviously, the safer we have to be with that data. And so, that's something we're taking very seriously, is our data privacy, our data security, making sure that there's the correct gates and access rights to different people and different stakeholders. Everybody wants to be connected and collaborating on a project, but you also can't have a field laborer from subcontractor A seeing the budgets and payroll of the general contractor, right? Just because that data is flowing through the same platform. There needs to be some thought as to who should see what and when and how do we protect and secure that data. So that's something that we're taking very seriously here at Trimble. But in general, it's something that we need to put forward first, as opposed to building this platform and thinking about data privacy later, because it's obviously such a critical thing to think about.
So it's not in terms of using digital twins and other metaverse technologies in construction, certainly on a major project. It's not just about the physical, is it? In terms of modeling and simulating a physical object in terms of a building. We talked earlier about standards and regulations and governance. Increasingly with large buildings, you're also talking about sustainability, carbon reduction, energy use, all this kind of stuff. So do you kind of have to build that in when you're looking at creating a digital twin for a construction project? Do you have to also factor those kind of governance and reporting aspects as well when you're designing your digital twin for the building?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great comment to bring up, because to me, I think the metaverse for the construction industry especially is really largely a sustainability product, is a sustainability effort. And I don't think that a lot of people look at it that way necessarily. But when you think about the metaverse and what that digital representation is meant to do, it's meant to reduce mistakes. It's meant to increase transparency, understanding, accountability. It's meant to reduce the amount of materials you're wasting and about the scheduled delays and things like that. And all of that turns into carbon that we're no longer emitting because we're not working on a project for a month longer than we should have. So that's a month worth of carbon we're not emitting. Or, we've spotted mistakes and reworking clashes in our designs and changed those in time so that we're not wasting material, right? We're not prefabricating material that's then being redesigned and being thrown out, right? So we're not wasting as much embodied carbon. And then most importantly, I can't remember the exact number off the top of my head, but I think something like 40% of the carbon emittance from the built environment is about operating buildings, right? So not just in that life cycle of building the building itself, but maintaining it, right? So thinking about how do we leverage the metaverse for better designing buildings that are going to be more sustainable for the long term. But then furthermore, how do we leverage the metaverse and a digital twin and all that information while we're operating and maintaining the building for the rest of its life cycle? So fundamentally, to me, the metaverse is really a means to be more sustainable and more environmentally conscious as we work in the construction industry. And it's exactly like you said, it's not just the physical, it's so much more about, four-dimensional and different data sources and different insights like that, for sure.
So as an organization that specializes in providing these technologies, what are the barriers either to yourself, but specifically for the end user, the client, to the adoption of these industrial metaverse technologies? Is it practical? Is it technological? Is it financial or cultural? Getting the buy-in for wanting to do some of this thing. It's a nice to have, but they're expensive.
Yeah, is there an all of the above check mark that I can answer here? It's all of those things. It's definitely, there's aspects like we talked about earlier. The construction industry as a whole largely has remained the same in their process, right? So there's definitely a cultural element of how do we get away from this is the way we've always done it. How do we recognize new value, right? The other aspect is how do we improve upon the technology? How do we drive value? How do we provide tangible benefits so that it becomes a no-brainer, right? That's another part. But in terms of barriers to entry, I think a large part is going to be how are we set up today, right? How are we approaching our projects today? Are we designing in 3D or are we designing for 2D, right? a lot of people may use a 3D model, but really that's just for looks, because they'll still then plan to turn that into a 2D drawing that gets sent out to the job site to actually be constructed upon, right? So it's about taking steps, right? I don't think that this industrial metaverse is ever going to turn on and, you know, from day one all of a sudden everything's there and it's all good. I think there's a long process that we need to go through that's going to be getting people bought in, first of all, on the value of the technology, reducing the cost of the barrier to entry by providing tangible value and tangible return on your investment. And then a large part of it is just purely going to be, how do we improve upon the communication that we have today? How do we change the way that people are working? And that's really what, you know, we need to try and do, is transform the way the world is working, change the way that contracts are set out, change the way that people see data and see construction as a whole. And that's where it starts to feed into sustainability, into regulations, into owner-driven requirements and things like that.
So it really does come down to demonstrating the real value of these things, and education. Clearly, the industry as a whole has a great deal of knowledge gaining to be had. Nathan, we're just about out of time now. I do appreciate your time, your expertise, and for sharing your knowledge with us, and also with our viewers and our readers. It'll be most appreciated. So I thank you for that, and I hope the weather has been treating you kindly in Colorado.
It's been great, nice and sunny. Yeah, really appreciate you having me here, Nick. Thank you.
Thank you kindly.